Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another day of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sarah. I'm one of the educators here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and I'm so excited that you have joined us this morning because we are going to talk all about habitats. Now, this word habitat might be a new word for you. It might be a word that you already know what it is, but we are going to discover what a habitat is, and then we're going to take a look at two different habitats that we have here at the aquarium, and we're going to compare and contrast and see what is similar and what is different between these two habitats. Now, while we're exploring, we'd love to hear from you. And I said we because I am here with Cynthia. So it's me, Sarah, and Cynthia, and we are working as a team today. And we would love to hear your thoughts, your observations, your questions as we explore today. Now, Cynthia just put this number on the screen. This is our text line. So you can text us at 562-286-1838. And those texts will go to Cynthia, and then she'll send them over to me, and we can talk about things that you're interested in. We can answer any questions you have, and we can share your observations live on the air. Now, if you are watching live, that means it is 9 a.m. on February 23rd. You can go ahead and use that text line. But if you're watching after the fact, we still want to hear from you. We're just not always manning this text line. So you can use the email address that you see just below this phone number, live@lbaop.org. So you can use either of those ways to communicate, and we would love to hear from you today. All right, you ready to get started? Let's explore. So I mentioned that word habitat. So that's the first thing we have to figure out is what is a habitat? Now, if you have an idea of what a habitat is, go ahead and text us. And I'm going to have Cynthia drop us into any habitat that she has access to. And there's that word, excellent. So take a look at this habitat. Does this give you a clue? You may recognize this habitat. But the word habitat, what it really means is it's a home for an animal. So every animal has a habitat. It has a place they live. And the habitat is everything around them. It could be living things, and it could be non-living things. Whatever makes up their community or their space around them, that is a habitat. So think about where you live. Where do you live? So I'm picturing I live in an apartment, and there's a couple other apartments around mine and other buildings, and then there's some trees, there's a park nearby. So that's my habitat. Is I live in an apartment, and I have this park and grass and trees all around me, and that is my habitat. So think about, where do you live? You might live in an apartment. You might live in a house. Some people live in camper vans. Some people live in tents. There's lots of places you could live, but anywhere you live, that is your habitat. Now, if we're switching gears and we're thinking about in the ocean, there are lots of different ocean habitats. So you might think the ocean is a habitat. And you're right, there are animals who live in the water. But if we dive down into the water and we swim around and we go to all these different places in the ocean, it's going to look really different. The whole ocean under the water doesn't look the same because there are different habitats. So there are different types of places where animals can live. And it has to do with what those animals need to survive. Some animals might need a lot of space, so their habitat is going to look different. Some animals might need more plant life or more animals around or more rocks or more sand. It just depends on what they need to survive, and that will change what their habitat looks like. Now today we're going to use our webcams that we have here at our aquarium. So we have cameras inside our exhibit, so we're going to use those to explore two different habitats. Now the first habitat we're going to look at looks similar to this. So what we're looking at here is a kelp forest. Now this video is of kelp out in the open ocean. So we have kelp forests right here along our coast in Southern California. But we're going to go into one of our exhibits. Excellent. So this is amber forest. So if you've ever visited our aquarium and you walk straight inside and then you saw this really big, tall exhibit called Blue Cavern, just next to it, just to the right of it, is amber forest. And so this is a kelp forest habitat. Now, as we are looking at this habitat, what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment and make some observations. So this is where we would love to hear from you. Remember, you can use this text line 562-286-1838, and you can share your observations. Now, that's another big word we're throwing at you this morning. But observations are a tool that scientists use when they're studying or when they're learning about a place, like a habitat. And so all you have to do for observations is look at this image we have here and then say what you see. Describe it. Now, if you want to text us, we would love to hear from you, but you can also just think it in your brain. If you're watching in your classroom, you can turn to your partner or someone sitting next to you or in front or behind you, and you can share with them. If you're at home and you're watching with a family member or a friend, you can share with them. If you're watching with your pet, you can always talk with them, or you can just think it. So I'm going to start thinking of some of my observations for this kelp forest. Now, one thing I noticed, and you can't see, but I was doing this while I was making my observations. So I was moving back and forth. I was almost copying what is happening here. So if you notice, or one thing I noticed, is that the water has a little bit of movement to it. It's a little bit of a current. It's not very strong.
Kevin just texted in that the water is moving.
Oh, and Kevin just texted in the same thing I was thinking. Great minds, Kevin, that the water is moving. Yeah. So we notice that there is some movement. Now, it's not super strong. Everything's not kind of blowing all over the place, but there is a gentle movement back and forth. And that is common in a kelp forest to see some movement. So the water isn't what we call stagnant. It's not still. It's moving back and forth. And then what we notice is some of the other things in this habitat sort of move with the water. So I noticed this stuff right here, this kind of green stuff here. This is kelp. It's an algae, so it's similar to a plant, but not quite a plant. It's an algae, is moving with the water. But not only is that algae moving, but I noticed that some of the fish, they're not really swimming back and forth. They are just kind of drifting with the water right here. Oh, we turned over. It's a little bit of a loop of a video. So some of them are just kind of drifting with the water. Now, something else I noticed, another thing we can do when we're making observations, is looking at things like shapes and colors. And I noticed there's a couple colors in this habitat, but we see that color a lot. So there's some greens right here, I noticed, and some browns down here. This is another type of kelp. So there's different types of kelp. Some are tall, some are shorter, some of the blades are really long and skinny, some are wider. So we've got some greens and browns. And then I'm looking at the fish, and their colors on their body are pretty similar. Some browns, like that fish right in the middle. And then maybe a little bit of oranges, right? Oh, all the way over here, I see a little bit of orange. And up here, ooh, and I just noticed right there. What did you see right here? Do you recognize that animal? A starfish or a sea star. So in this kelp forest, we've got kelp. We have some fish that are kind of grays and browns and orange. There's a sea star. And then you may have noticed there's another animal. Let's see if we can spot it again. It's got a much longer body than those fish. But I noticed that there was a shark in here. See if we can spot a shark. There it is. Right there. Did you see that? Did you notice this is a shark? So this is a leopard shark. It's one of the common animals that we'll find living in a kelp forest. And you notice its body is kind of that grayish brown as well, and it makes it almost hard to see. So if we think about these habitats, these animals, their bodies often match the color in their habitat. So that shark, their body is kind of the similar color to the greens and browns and grays of the kelp and the rocks and the sand down here, and that helps them to blend in. Oh, but look how bright this fish is down here. Do you notice that one? Let's take a closer look at that one fish. Aha! Now, this fish kind of strays from what I was saying before, of a lot of those fish in that habitat blend in with their surroundings. This fish right here is called a Garibaldi. Now, the Garibaldi is a very special fish for us here in California because it is our California state marine fish. And it's this very bright orange color. Now, I want you to think, why might an animal be a very bright color? So in that habitat, in the kelp forest, we say the colors are sort of like a muted colors, right? Nothing super bright and vibrant. It's all kind of these greens and browns and grays and blacks. And a lot of the animals, they're the same color so that they can stay protected and blend in. But this fish right here, this is the exception, right? The Garibaldi is this bright, bright orange, which makes it really easy to see, and it stands out in a kelp forest. So why do you think an animal might choose to be bright like this one? We'll put that text line up again so you have that number, and let us know if you have any ideas why a fish might be even brighter than most of the other animals or most of the parts of its habitat. Now, the Garibaldi, we'll give you a moment to answer that question, but the Garibaldi is a really cool fish, and it's only about, they only grow to about this big. So it's not a huge fish. It's not tiny, but it's not huge. It's about this big. But what's interesting is as a baby, they look a little bit different than this one. Do we have a picture of a baby Garibaldi? I'm going to have Cynthia take a look and see if we have a picture of a baby Garibaldi, because their body looks very different. There's a couple things that are different. Not only is the shape of their body a little bit different, so you can see right here there's sort of like bumps on this Garibaldi's head. The babies, they don't really have those bumps just yet. And they are bright orange color, but they have something added to their body. And that way, if we go into the water, or if you ever see some Garibaldis, you can tell if the fish is a baby or if it's an adult. Because as the adult, they're the solid orange color. But as a baby, they have bright... Oh, we do. We're going to show a picture right now. Ta-da! Looks very different. If you saw these two fish, you may not even think that one grows up to be the other. But the baby Garibaldi, bright orange. This is the adult, baby, bright blue spots. So the babies have these bright electric blue spots. And I've been snorkeling with these fish, and I can tell you they look as bright as you see in this picture here if you're swimming with them in the water. Ooh, interesting. So they have these really bright blue spots. And someone texted in that maybe they might be bright colors, and as a baby even brighter, because they're poisonous. And that is a great idea. And that is true for a lot of animals. A lot of animals like frogs and some other fish might have these bright colors as a warning because they're poisonous. Now you're on the right track because the Garibaldi is not poisonous. But if you thought it was, would you stay away from it? Absolutely, right? So the Garibaldi is almost tricking you into thinking it's poisonous by being this bright color, because to us, bright colors is a warning. It's same in the ocean and in wildlife. Bright colors is a warning that this animal might be venomous or poisonous or dangerous. Now the Garibaldi isn't, but they have this bright color as a warning to stay away, because the Garibaldi can be very tough and territorial. And what that means is they like to live in caves and they don't like anyone else to be in their space. I know some people like that, right? We all like our own space, but the Garibaldi is very, very much likes their own space, and they don't like anyone to be near them. And so they have this bright color as a warning to say, if you come near, I'm going to chase you away. Now, what's kind of funny is we have our big blue cavern. So we're going to go into blue cavern, but I'm going to tell you it's going to be a little bit of a funny view. So we have a camera in our blue cavern, which is one of our largest exhibits here at the aquarium. And usually our camera is down below, so we can kind of see in front of us. But we've moved the camera for the moment, and it's up above. So we're going to be looking down into this kelp forest. It's a cool view, but it's a little bit different than what we're used to when we look at blue cavern. Now, in blue cavern, we don't have any Garibaldi, and there's a reason why. We have had Garibaldi in here. So we're at the very top right now. So you can see the bottom, but this is like 28 feet down, and we're looking down into this exhibit. So we have had Garibaldi in here, which looks really cool because this exhibit is a lot of grays and blues and greens, and so it's pretty to have these bright orange fish. But those orange fish scare away a lot of our other fish, including our giant sea bass, which are these 6-foot, couple 100-pound fish. And this tiny little orange fish scares them. And so while most of the time the giant sea bass like to hang out down here, like you can see one right there, they like to hang out at the bottom. When they're Garibaldi in their exhibit, it scares them to the top. And so we don't like to scare our fish too much, and so we take the Garibaldi out and we put them in other exhibits where they're less likely to freak out the rest of our animals. But that Garibaldi is known for being very tough and territorial, and that coloring helps give a warning. I also think it's really cool. It's got like a heart-shaped tail. That's why I think they're cute too. Excellent. All right, so let's go back to Amber Forest for just a moment. All right, so we are looking at this kelp forest. So we notice the colors. We notice some of the fish and sharks and the sea star. That kelp is a big part of it. And remember, kelp is that algae. So kelp forests, they're basically like a forest you would think of on land where there's lots of trees, but underwater. And these kelp will just grow and grow and grow and create this whole underwater forest, which becomes a home for all these animals we see here. Now, I think I mentioned that this is a local habitat. So we have this habitat right here along our Southern California coast, which is really cool. So if you go out in the water and you go snorkeling or you go scuba diving, this is what you're going to be swimming in, is a kelp forest. And you can see not only the kelp, but a lot of these similar animals that you see here. But we're going to switch gears and we're going to move on to a different habitat. Now, it's a habitat that we have here at the aquarium, but it's not a habitat that we have here along our Southern California coast. So it's going to be a little bit different. There might be some similarities, but there might be something different. So I'm going to have Cynthia put us into our big tropical gallery or big tropical exhibit here at the aquarium. Now, one more thing to note as Cynthia is preparing to move us into that gallery is the water here along our coast is kind of chilly. I don't know if anyone's been in the ocean lately, but we call our water temperate. So it's not the coldest that water could be, but it's usually in the mid to low 60s. which is a little bit chilly. But the water we're going to look at next is very different. It's very warm. It's usually in the mid to high 70s. So it's almost 10 to 15 degrees warmer. And I wonder if that changes anything about the habitat. I wonder if it's going to look like amber forest or if it's going to look different. Let's take a look. Whoa. What do you think? Remember, you can use that text line to send us your observations. So I want to know what you think about this habitat. Make some observations. What do you see? Colors, shapes, animals, things. And also thinking about, does it look like that kelp forest? Or does it look different? Are there anything that's the same? Or is everything completely different? So let's take a moment and be our scientists today and make some observations. Well, I see a shark, right? This right here is a shark. Now that shark does look very different from the leopard shark we were looking at before, but both habitats have sharks. So that would be a similarity, something that is the same between the two habitats, but it is a different type of shark. So that makes it a little bit different. I wonder what other things we can notice. Ooh, someone said there are more fish. Absolutely. There are way more fish here. And that's not just because this is a larger exhibit or we decide to put more fish and less in the other one. That is how it would be if you were to go swimming in these habitats. Interesting. So someone mentioned there is no kelp, and that's correct, because we are no longer in a kelp forest. Now, if you go diving in a kelp forest or snorkeling, you'll see a lot of fish, but you will not see probably as many fish as you might see in a habitat like the one we're currently looking at, which is a coral reef. And so that observation that there is no kelp is correct, because this water is way too warm for the kelp to survive. Excellent. Wonderful observations are coming in. So there's a lot of fish with yellow tails, which I noticed too right here. There's a lot with yellow tails, which, believe it or not, are not yellowtail, because we have a fish here at the aquarium called a yellowtail, but it actually would be found in the kelp forest. But those fish do have yellow tails. You notice, I think, a ray. Is that correct? A stingray? You're right. There are some rays in here. And corals. Absolutely. So we are looking at a coral reef habitat. Now, before it goes away, I'm going to point out, we like to break for turtles. There is a turtle right up here. So we have two turtles. We have three turtles here at the aquarium. One lives in this exhibit. This is Lou. And Lou's brother, Theo, lives outside in Shark Lagoon. But we like to break for turtles, as I say, because they can hold their breath for a couple hours. And so we don't always see them. Right now it looks like he's dancing. Can you guys dance like a turtle? It's like doing this kind of thing. We don't usually see that. Usually they move their flippers like this. But sometimes they get a little wild and move them all over. So you can see Lou is kind of being a little goofball today. There you go. He's moving them up and down. Sometimes it looks like Lou gets himself stuck in the corals, which he might, but he also knows how to get himself unstuck. I will say, as cute as they are not the most coordinated of animals. So he tends to bump into things a lot. So we'll keep an eye on what Lou is doing up there at the top. Being a goofball. Sorry, I got distracted by him. But anyways, this is a coral reef habitat. So the water's a lot warmer. And whereas in a kelp forest, sort of the base of that habitat is the kelp, in this habitat, it's the coral. Now, if you are wondering where the coral is in this exhibit, you'll see a lot of rock work, which is something we also saw in the kelp forest. But all these kind of splashes of color. There's some red here and orange, and there's pink up here, and there's green and yellow, and all these other colors over here. Those are all parts of coral. Now, to let you in on a little secret about this exhibit. This is our largest exhibit here at the aquarium. It's 350,000 gallons of water. There are about 1,000 animals in here covering 100 species. So it's a huge exhibit. But that coral is not one of those animals in there. So even though this is a coral reef, the coral in this exhibit is not alive. It's what we call artificial. So we had a company who built this coral for us. Now, they did a lot of research, and they made that coral to look exactly like real coral would. But this is such a large exhibit. If we tried to put enough coral to fill it, that would be a lot of coral we would have to take from the ocean, and that's not something the aquarium was comfortable with. But luckily, our animals don't really know the difference. So they treat this artificial coral the exact same way they would treat any real coral. So some of the fish will hide in it. Some will lay their eggs in it. Some will feed off of it, so they don't know the difference, and we feel a lot better not having pulled all this coral. Now, we do have some live coral exhibits at the aquarium, so we'll go dive into one of those exhibits. Look at this. Now, you might notice a little bit of different. It's much smaller, and you'll notice a little bit more movement of those rock-like structures, which is the coral. Now, a lot of the corals that we have here were basically rescues. So someone was bringing them in when they weren't supposed to from other places coming back into the United States. And so they were given to us so that we could protect and help grow these corals. So that's where we get a lot of our corals. So you can see right here, this thing that looks like fingers, like it's moving, that's a kind of coral. This one over here that kind of also looks like fingers but is not moving as much, also a kind of coral. These are corals here, these are corals here. So all over. And we notice that the fish in here are a little bit smaller than we would see in a kelp forest. So while we see more fish, they're not quite as big as the fish we might see in a kelp forest, and they are way more colorful. Now, we had that one bright orange Garibaldi in a kelp forest, but in a coral reef, we get a lot of different fish that are a lot of different colors. And as you all mentioned before, one reason could be a warning because they might be poisonous or venomous. But there are a couple other reasons, too, that they might be so colorful. Ooh, look at the colors here. I love this exhibit. This is the first exhibit you see when you go into our tropical gallery. And it's a really kind of shallow but long exhibit. And it's got all these cool fish in. And what was really cool is when we were closed down at the beginning of the pandemic and we started coming in, these fish love to see people. And so they would follow you wherever you go. They would all go to one side as you came by, and then they would all go to the other side as you walked by. But look at all the colors we see here. Still lots of yellow tails, yellow bodies, some stripes, different patterns, a darker blue fish, a white fish with a black eye. All kinds of colors. So what is another reason why these fish might be so colorful? So definitely could be a warning, but they also live in a very colorful habitat. And so that helps them camouflage. So even though they are bright colors and it kind of stands out, their habitat is also bright colors. Like, look how bright this coral right here is, this bright green. And there's some more bright colors over there. And so these bright colors on the fish's body can help them to blend in to their bright colored surroundings. So there's a lot of different reasons animals can be bright and different colors. Now let's take a look at one fish that lives in the coral reef. Just like we focus on the Garibaldi, we'll focus on one fish from the coral reef. And I'm going to let Cynthia pick any tropical fish for us to take a look at. Aha! Look at this one. This one is interesting. This is a butterfly fish. What do you notice about this fish? There's a couple of interesting things that strike me when I look at this fish. Ah, excellent camouflage. I love that you use that word. Someone just texted in camouflage, and that's right. So blending in with their surroundings, the fancy word for it is camouflage. And that is absolutely correct. Why these animals would be bright different colors, living in a brightly different colored habitat, is to camouflage with their surroundings. Excellent. Now, looking at this fish, you might not think it would be able to camouflage, but the color pattern on this fish's body is specially built for it to blend in to its surroundings. So take a look back here. It's kind of blurry back here, but there's an anemone. Now, anemones are those kind of flower-like, plant-like animals that have these long tentacles that kind of move in the water. And this anemone that we can kind of see in the background has these white tentacles. Well, look at the body of this fish. White stripe, white stripe, white stripe. So those stripes that break up the pattern of this fish's body can help it blend in with the anemone because those anemone's tentacles are moving back and forth. And if this fish is swimming near the anemone, it might make it harder for a predator to find where this fish is. Now, there's something else on this fish's body that makes it harder for a predator to find where its body is. Did you notice something interesting about the fish's body? It's got these white stripes and yellow stripes. But look at this thing right here. This spot. Any ideas what that spot is or might be used for? Do you see another spot on the fish's body? We've got some head nods, yes. Absolutely. So they've got one spot here, but take a look at this spot. Oop, too far, right here. What's this right here we're looking at? The eye. So this is a fish's eye. Is this another eye? No. But it's a pretend eye, or we call it a false eye spot. So we actually see it in a lot of fish and even some sharks. They have a second spot that looks similar to their eye, but it's at the back or the end of their body. And that can help protect them because it makes it harder for a predator, an animal who might try and eat this fish, to find the head, and it makes it very confusing, and then they don't know where to catch this fish from. Now, that false eye spot can, one, confuse them, but also it makes their eye look even bigger. And in the ocean, really big eyes can be kind of scary. So someone texted in to make the fish look bigger. You're right. So it makes the fish, their body look bigger. It makes them look like they have a much bigger eye, which can be much scarier to a predator. And that helps keep this fish safe because no one would want to eat or attack it if they've got these big eyes and this big body. And it makes it harder for predators. So that is why we have this false eye spot, and we see it in a couple different animals that use it as a means of protection. All right, I'm going to have Cynthia put us back into, I'm going to have us go into one of our other coral reef exhibits called Coral Predators. Because we have a couple minutes left, but we have some questions that came in. Keeping Cynthia on her toes today. All right, so this is one of our other webcams, one of our other exhibits. And while we're watching these fish, let's answer some questions. So these questions are from Miss Dominguez's class. Thank you so much for joining us again. We love hearing from you. So the first question is, what do the fish eat? So that depends on the type of fish. Now, in a coral reef, there is lots of different options for them. That butterfly fish we were looking at before, if you notice, its mouth was really, really skinny and little, right? It had this very thin mouth, so it's going to be eating really, really tiny food, little plankton, little tiny shrimp, or other things that are floating around the water. Here in our Coral Predators exhibit, we have some fish called parrotfish who have a beak, like this one back here. Their mouth is more of a beak, and this is another parrotfish right here. This is our bicolor parrotfish. And their beak is used to eat coral. So they can munch into the coral, and inside coral is little algae, and that's where they get their nutrients from. So that's a great question. So it really just depends on the type of fish, what it is that they're going to be eating. Great question. How do we feed them all? So I think we're going to be thinking about that giant exhibit that has 1,000 animals in it, and it's a lot of work. So we have a whole team of divers. Now what's amazing is most of our divers are volunteers. So you can volunteer to dive here with our animals, and one of your jobs is to feed the animals. Another job is cleaning. There's a lot of cleaning to do, imagine in that huge exhibit, but they feed. Now there's a couple different ways we feed our animals. One is called scatter feeding. So for a fish like these, where there's a lot of them and the smaller ones, our divers are just going to throw food in the water. And then they all swarm and they feed on that. And they throw enough food in there that they know that the fish are going to all be able to eat. And then for some of our larger animals, like in that exhibit, we didn't get to see it, but we have one huge fish. It's a grouper. It's about the same size as those giant sea bass from a kelp forest, about 6 to 7 feet long. And that fish, we want to make sure that that fish gets some food. He's a little bit slower moving than some of the smaller fish. And so while all those little fish are eating all that food that was scattered, we can target feed or put food right into the mouth of some of our larger animals. And so it's a whole team effort. We have 3 or 4 divers in the water, and they go in a couple times a day, I think 2 or 3 times a day, to feed our animals. And they have a plan when they go in, and they kind of take different sections, and they know who they're feeding. And that way we can make sure that all of our animals are eating, they're eating the right food, and they're getting enough food. Good questions. All right, so we've got 3 questions that we're going to answer before we have to say goodbye for today. So one is, how do we know if fish are poisonous or venomous? Do they live in caves, and do fish have fake eyes? So starting with the false eye spot, the fake eyes, absolutely. Just like that butterfly fish, we saw they had that false eye. So it's called a false eye spot because it's just a spot. It doesn't have any of the other organs or mechanisms that our eyes have. It's just a spot that kind of looks like an eyeball, and it makes it confusing for predators because they don't know where the real eye is. And the real eye is going to be near the head, and that's a good place to go if you're trying to attack an animal to eat it. And so this makes it really confusing and hard to find it. Do fish live in caves? Absolutely. They live in coral, they live in rocks, they live in any kind of space that they can find that's going to keep them safe. So in every habitat where there's rocky caves, we'll find fish living in it. So both in a coral reef and a kelp forest, there are fish who like to live in caves. So that's one similarity. And then that first question, how do we know if a fish is venomous? That's a good question. And just by looking at a fish, we can take a guess, right, because of their color. But like that Garibaldi, that one is not venomous or poisonous, and it is a bright color. So you really just have to know or study these fish, maybe look it up in a book or talk to a scientist to know for sure if a brightly colored fish is venomous or poisonous. Some might have spines, some might be when they bite you. It just kind of depends on the fish, and it depends if they're actually going to have any toxins in their body, which type of fish we're looking at. Because some might just have those bright colors as a warning, and some might be a warning that they're venomous. So it just depends, again, on the type of fish we're looking at. So the fish in here, in this exhibit, they're all brightly colored as warnings, but these ones are not going to harm, they're not going to be harmful to us. But that doesn't mean that some fish aren't harmful, and that's just their way of protecting each other. All right, everyone. We had that quick little comparison of our kelp forest and our coral reef. You had some excellent questions, which we love answering. If you have more questions, feel free to email us at live@lbaop.org. We would love to be able to answer your questions, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. But don't forget, we have another program at 10 a.m. Cynthia's going to be teaching our program in Spanish, and I believe it's about the deep sea. So we're going to be just discovering everything we can know about the deep sea. All right, everyone, we hope to see you then. Bye.